Hi, everyone. It's Raghu Markus back with Mindrolling with a special friend who we haven't talked in quite some time, at least live on a podcast. Danny Goldberg. Danny, welcome.
Hi.
Hi. So now, Danny, of course, has had a show, a podcast on Be Here Now Network, which you can find. Just look for Danny Goldberg or look for what was the name of it, Danny?
Oh, it was called Rock and Rolls,
Oh
plural. It was
yes,
it
yes,
was a play on Ram Dass's injunction for us to remember that we're souls, not rolls.
yeah. And so there's some wonderful interviews up there and chats. So, and Danny, from time to time, when he can cut out of his busy schedule, we get him to come on. And particularly, I thought this was timely, being that we're in the early part of 2020, and we have this momentous event going to go on later in the year. And also, Danny, we haven't managed to since Ram Dass departed. Um, we actually haven't managed to even really talk about that. So that's something we can bring up in terms of what that means to you, particularly. Um,
Yes.
the other thing is that as it's been a while, I just want to remind people a little bit about, if they don't know you for any reason. So Danny's history is in the music business, and it's where we spent a formative part of our relationship there, although we had met a long time ago at a spiritual event. And so Danny started in the music business in PR, working for Led Zeppelin, and then worked his way, and then eventually started uh, working in management and had a major management company and record executive. But that was first of course, and you just wrote that book, right, about Kurt Cobain and managing Nirvana, serving the servant. And we'll put this all up in the show notes, people, so you can get an idea of the different things that Danny has done. And of course, at creating the label Artemis. And that's where, although we had done something previously, Danny and I, in terms of the music business and a collaboration, but it was at Artemis was the most recent stop. So, and Danny's been writing these great books. And Danny has been a champion at ACLU here in Los Angeles, and certainly somebody who has been involved in liberal causes and politics for a long time. He's my go-to person, everybody out there, in terms of getting some kind of reality check on the moment that we are in and its historic implications, a bigger view that Danny has given me around around these situations, and just some plain old, as they say in Yiddish, sechel, a little Sechel, which some common sense about what is going on, and also connected to our soul lives, shall we say. Is that a good little review of you, Danny?
I'm grateful for it. I will say one thing I've been doing recently that I don't know if I mentioned to you, but it's pertinent to our discussions. I've been writing a series of pieces for The Nation
Oh yeah.
magazine about the relationship, generally speaking, between art and politics. The next one's going to come out in a few days, and it's about the California presidential primary and how different people in the creative community are relating to it. So that's kind of a new outlet for me that I'm really enjoying, and hopefully it'll be the topic of my. It will be the topic of my next book also,
Great.
but that won't be out till 2021. So here we are. I think. Can I say the date we're having this conversation? Because it's
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
Everything is such a moving river of time, and this is the date. Tonight, there's going to be a debate with the Democratic aspirants. And then the Saturday, I guess, is the South Carolina caucus, and Tuesday is so-called Super Tuesday. And so in the next a week from today, as we speak, things are going to be different in terms of the analysis of who might be running for president.
Right.
So
Now,
it's a fast-moving
yeah,
train we're on.
yeah, yeah. And Danny and I just talked before we went live, and I said I want to do a disclaimer, and he said so do I. But here's mine, because we're talking about, and I just mentioned that Danny has been a part of liberal causes for a long time, and obviously is a Democrat, and obviously I am, and I only say that because we've been friends a long time. It might have been hard if I had been a Republican. I don't know. But that's what I'm addressing, because sometimes when we do bring up any kind of this, and we're bringing this up to um, not to cheerlead. Okay, we're bringing it up because we really want to look at everything, including ourselves and the people that we hold as opposite, and deal with some of the polarization, deal with some of the fear that's going on, and as well as saying some things that we feel, and in this case, I count on Danny to give me, some wisdom around this particular situation and this election this year. So, but whenever I do that, I do get back mail from people saying something like, "Do you have to be a Democrat to be spiritual?" And of course, the answer is absolutely not. And now, I've actually written a letter to a couple of people and said, this is not about the opposing. Yes, I do oppose some of the policies that the Republican Party espouses, but I'm talking about a situation where we have somebody who is president who is not at all anywhere near being in their heart. I mean, is the most simple way I can put it in terms of the way I feel about it, and is doing destructive stuff, even just by virtue of some of the kinds of tweets that he does. And I know many people like them, and so on. So this is not about Republican or Democrat. This is about we're in a situation where a lot of fear has been created, and that's what we want to investigate. Danny?
Yeah, the frame I was thinking of bringing to the conversation, or one of the frames, was something both you and I and Ram Dass, I believe, admired and were friends with Bernie Glassman,
Yes.
who's created the Zen Peacemakers Order and was a highly trained as a Buddhist, and passed on, I think, a year or two ago, pretty recently.
Yeah.
Him and Ram Dass are, I'm sure, laughing it up, some other dimension. And in the last few years of his life, Bernie developed this thing about communication, where he said to me, and I'm sure it's to hundreds of other people, that he wanted to try to say, in my opinion, as a introduction to anything he was saying. He said, if people would just say, in my opinion, it would just reduce so much the tension in the world. And so, I really don't know for sure anything except my own opinions and my intuition and my instincts. I think that that I honor that God created every single person, including Trump and Trump voters, and that we're all somehow one in the spirit. And I don't always know how to perceive and process that and can communicate at that level, but that's the aspiration, is to try to be ethical citizens and do what we feel is the right thing, right as we see it, as we understand what's right, while still honoring there's just so much that we don't know, and trying to have some framing that allows us to know these are opinions, not more than that. So that was kind of my way into the same dilemma, which is how to really stand firm for what I believe is the right thing politically and ethically, and not dishonor the spirituality and humanity of people with different opinions.
Right.
And the truth is that over the years, I've changed my opinions about plenty of things, and plenty of the people I thought were exemplary leaders didn't turn out to be that great. And even Trump, there are things he's done that I like. I like the thing of changing some of the prison system where some more people were able to get out of jail earlier, and there's probably other things too that I'm not thinking of. So I really frame it that way. And to me, Ram Dass, as in so many other issues, is a role model in this. I mean, you were kind enough to send me this talk he gave during I think it was the first year of Bill Clinton's administration. So that must have been 1993. It sounded to me like it was 93. Maybe it was 94. And boy, he was certainly not at all shy about saying what his political beliefs were in that talk. It was really, I hadn't actually heard anything with him being quite that sharp-edged. And yet he's also the person who put pictures of George W. Bush and John Boehner and Donald Trump on his puja table, and really tried to live up to, Maharaji's teaching to love everybody, to include everybody. And that is our job, while having a rational, intelligent, and ethical discussion about the election. So how to do that, I don't know, but that's the aspiration.
Yeah. Just so people have a reference, because actually this talk, which did come from, it's actually March 27th, 1993. And it was called In Between Stories. It's not out there yet, and it will be in the next couple of weeks. So by March 2020, early March, I believe it'll be out there. And In Between Stories. And I found it fascinating. Now, in the beginning, he talks about, the reference is more the religious institutions than political institutions, but it's easily transferable. And he starts out saying, we're in trouble because we're in between stories. So the patriarchal stories that we've been living with so long, and obviously there's a big pushback on that now. But a new story hasn't developed. What did you think about that?
I listened to it twice all the way through, because I really wanted to process it. And there were a lot of things in there that really were fun to hear. I mean, that's the amazing thing about him is you think you've heard all of his raps, and then some completely new things come across, through the magic of recording. I think that people definitely react to a lot of things in the society, including political decisions, based on where they're coming from and what their experiences are, what they grew up believing, and what their life has been like. And so, two different people with different backgrounds are going to look at things really, really differently. I think the aspiration to have one human race that somehow can coexist in the most ethical and moral way is an old aspiration. It certainly started before the 60s with, Eleanor Roosevelt and the people who created the United Nations. And, long before that, utopian ideals. But it bumps up against fear, and how to honor, not hate people for being scared or despise them or dehumanize them, but to try to find a way of honoring and listening to them in a way that allows you to somehow move forward. I mean, he also said, which is true. I think I saw a statistic today that 3% of all the money spent on armaments would eliminate global hunger. So you can still have 97% as many nuclear weapons and tanks and bullets and guns and prisons and all that stuff. And that's just so profoundly disturbing about the whole human race. It's not just an American issue, Lord knows. So how to look at that and then still function in a day-to-day world, I don't know. There's no question that when you look at the political landscape in the United States in 2020, there's a gigantic schism between people that are younger and people that are older. I mean, the political opinions of people under 30 are so much more what we would call progressive or left wing. Within the Democratic Party, and the most recent thing in Nevada, the caucus, 65% of people under 30 were for Bernie Sanders. And, there was an electoral map that people put online after the 2016 election, that if only people under 30 had voted, Hillary would have gotten, 420 electoral votes. It would have been a landslide. So there's just no question that people under 30, under 35, and increasingly, under 40, the years keep piling on, have a very different view of the way the government and society should be organized and what the threats are than people who are over, my generation, and yours. We're the outliers within our generation. Our children are mainstream for their generation with the same political ideas. So that really plays into Ram Dass's thing about a changing in the stories that people tell themselves about and how do you deal with that? I don't know. I've always had a romantic view of younger people. I think they're, I believe I have to, that somehow generations get a little more conscious, a little more enlightened. And, if it's a coin flip, I'll always go with what younger people want.
So, I mean, the other thing that he talks about in this talk from '93 is he does really frame out that the world that we live in is basically a fear-driven social structure.
Yes.
Right. And that is the most pertinent thing that we are dealing with. And so the stories that surrounds, that's supporting that fear-driven social structure, which emboldens people who are hungry for power and money, and satisfies that. Just look at Putin, and I mean, as transparent as he is, he's very transparent. I met a Russian woman who said, "Yeah, no, that's all true about him, but I will tell you, there's no crime." She goes, "In Moscow, there's no crime." So they're willing. So that story is willing to take one thing in exchange for less of another. I think so. There are so many stories that support this fear-driven social structure. And then, and he mentioned something, Danny. In the '60s, he said, we touched a sense of a love-driven social structure. But I guess and you wrote a book, that took us through '67, how the left lost the team. No, that's a whole other book, right?
No. That's my first book. This was called in Search of the Lost Chord, 1967, and the hippie idea. And although I focused on the year 1967, it was a doorway into looking at the '60s writ large. I dedicated it to Ram Dass, Paul Krasser, and Wavy Gravy. Two of the three are now in another world. Yeah. Wavy is still on this planet along with us. And you were kind enough to help me get some answers to questions from Ram Dass that were very important to me in terms of trying to have a, retroactive look at that. I don't. There's a writer named Reinhold Niebuhr, who was a big influence of Dr. King, who wrote in the 30s and 40s, and his most famous book is Moral Man in an Immoral Society, and about how individuals and families and small groups, it's easier for them to live up to moral codes and behavior, but when you get whole societies organized, the job of the people running them is not necessarily to be the most moral, but to represent the self-interest of that group, and that it's caused all of these problems over the millennia with nations, and so it's not a new problem for human beings, but there are examples of where it's worked better or worse. And I think, to me, when we talk about this election and different people's ideas, one of the things that makes change less scary and more able to really contemplate is if you can model off of examples where things are done in a more humane way. And, I do think that in terms of healthcare and the way college is paid for and the way retirement and childcare when people have babies, there's certain basic things where there are societies that seem to have a better system in terms of their citizenry than the one that we have. And the question is, can you make those changes the way we've done historically? Obviously, when my grandparents were born, there was no such thing as Social Security. There was no such thing as the minimum wage. There was no such thing as child labor laws. I think all those things made us a better society, So change is possible, but it is nerve-wracking for people, and they're worried that things will be made worse or it'll help somebody else at their expense. And, I think the extent you can look at models of things that work, it's a little less scary to contemplate change.
Yeah. Yeah. And again,
and you come from and of course you come from, I know you're an American now, but you come from Canada, where, a lot of the things we liberals want for our government and society are things that Canada already does.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there was no financial crisis in Canada. When we had the financial meltdown because of subprime mortgages in 2008, Canada didn't have that because they didn't permit those kind of mortgages.
Yeah.
There was no.
I'm just going to say I'm a dual citizen. I want to make that known. Okay.
Very good. Okay.
I'm keeping my options open. Okay.
Very good.
Yes, all of that is true, and there's plenty of issues that are going on in Canada as well. But I want to go back to so in the 60s, him saying we touched a sense of a love-driven social structure. We did. And then what followed after that was, first of all, accusations soon after, this is a naive concept that you have, and it is not possible. And when you grow up and you have children and you got to have responsibility, then all this shit goes out the window. You hear many, many people of our purview. This is the way that they think back on what happened in the late 60s, early 70s. And of course, there's many things that one could say they are right about, but there's a core thing that was touched, I really believe, that stuck with us and had the possibility, and still does have the possibility, which is some of the work we like to think we're doing here at the foundation to promulgate that, to really change our story. The one that I always wanted to change my story. When I was a teenager, I wanted to change my story. I didn't know what this story didn't make any sense, coming from the culture and the social structure and so on. And so I do believe it has grounds for the ability to change our story and maybe not be as in between stories as we seem to be. That may be a very naive concept given what's going on with this polarization today, though.
Well, I just also look at it through a longer historical frame sometimes to calm myself down, because there's a certain level of hysteria that a lot of my friends have and that I'm susceptible to, just because of the sheer ubiquity of news, Facebook and Twitter and, cable news and all the other, sources of information uh, that there's actually this feeling that people say a lot of this is like the worst things have ever been, you know,
Yeah.
and that's definitely not true in the United States. It's definitely not the worst things have ever been. I mean, that's just factually untrue. We had slavery until 1865. So let's just start with that. I mean, that was extremely bad, definitely worse. As, and then and then for another 100 years, there were the Jim Crow laws, which was, you know, halfway between slavery and legal equality. So that only legally got changed, you know, in our lifetime. You know, when my grandmother was born, women couldn't even vote in the United States. And when I was growing up, you know, homosexuality was actually illegal. You know, people would go to jail,
Yeah.
you know, for, being entrapped into having some encounter somewhere. You know, and then another, you know, for those of us that are on the liberal side, certainly the McCarthyism was just a terrible problem. And for people in my line of work, the entertainment business, I mean, there were more than a decade where hundreds of people, whether it was people like Pete Seeger or Oscar-winning screenwriters like Dalton Trumbo or actors, couldn't work at all, you know, because they
Mm.
were accused of communism. So I just wrote a column about Kathy Griffin because she had a whole nightmare in her career.
Right.
She
The
posted this
comedian. Yeah.
Instagram picture of Trump, the comedian Kathy Griffin. Shortly after Trump was elected, she posted a gag photo of like a rubber Trump mask with ketchup on it that, you know, people looked at as if he had been beheaded. It was obviously not a real head and obviously not asking anyone to do violence, but she had her, you know, her agency dropped her. She had 25 concerts canceled. She was fired from her job as the co-host of CNN's New Year's Eve show. You know, she got death threats. She was investigated for conspiracy to assassinate the president for months
Wow.
because of a joke. So that's terrible. And I wrote a column about it, and it's an important story and her courage and coming back from that. And she has a movie, a documentary about it. I think it's called A Hell of a Story that you can see on the different services. But that's nothing compared to what people went through in the late 1940s and the early 50s. She was able to bounce back in a year. Bill Maher was fired from one show. He gets another show within a year. In the blacklisting period, it was 10, 15 years. And
Mm.
not to mention, an FBI that was investigating the private life of Martin Luther King and so on and so forth. And then we move forward even to more recent history. For many of us, feel that the Gulf War was really not in our national interest. I honor that other people felt differently, but the enormous number of people killed from that, far more than during this era. So this is a country with an enormous history of injustice and mistakes and suffering, and so is every other country. It's the human race. It's this.
Mm.
What do you guys call it? The Kali Yuga. You know,
Yeah.
um, I always feel bad about that because I love Kali so much. I love any
No.
name of the mother of the universe, and Ramakrishna, who's one of my great idols. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't. I wasn't on this planet when he was alive in this incarnation, but you know, the writings of Ramakrishna, he worshipped, you know, Kali, but the Kali Yuga is what does that mean? I mean, tell me, what does that mean?
You think I know
You're the
anything?
expert.
Oh yeah,
Yes, I think you know more
nothing. Some
about Hindu traditions than I do. I do.
so
I know you
somebody
do.
somebody in India said, okay, there's four different ages, and it starts with the purest age where God, Ram, came down to earth and he loved everybody. Everybody loved him. Everyone had a job. Everyone was taken care of. Okay, then you fast forward through a couple of other ages when wars started and internecine fighting and tribalism and all of that, all the way till we're in, it's called Kali, but Kali destroys ignorance. This isn't Kali
Right,
destroying
right,
people. So,
right,
but
right.
what that takes sometimes is, a destruction of an existing um, reality in a way that's going to give birth to a reality that maybe maybe has what we were talking about in the 60s. It maybe touches a sense of love-driven social structures. So that's what it's about. It's not,
Yeah, yeah,
and of course it's dark. There's, but we are dark now. Look what we're doing to the planet. Look what we are
yeah,
doing in
yeah.
the discrepancy of people who have money, a lot of money to how many people just don't have anything. The larger
Yes,
gap
yeah.
that look at we are doing. So this is going on, but it's also an opportunity in our minds to be able to suggest that there are ways in which we can go inside ourselves and start making a change, so that when we go out and say, we don't want that pipeline that was going through native land a couple of years ago, we can do it in a way that's not going to polarize. That is very difficult stuff to do, and it takes a
It
lot.
is. The other thing, talking about the 60s, it's funny. One of the questions I asked Ramdas about the 60s for the book, again, that you facilitated, was, is there a relationship between what was going on in the 60s and Trump's election? And he said yes. And
Hmm.
he said that there was a sense that a lot of us had, along with the love, there was a lack of respect of the full humanity of people who weren't kind of in our tribe.
Right.
And like, I remember, like, when I was young, we had this thing of like, are you ahead or are you not ahead? And to be ahead was someone who would take a psychedelic, smoke dope, and oh, he's ahead, he's cool.
Yeah.
Oh, he's not ahead, he's not cool. So nobody really wants to be, the non-head who's not in on the joke. And there's a certain kind of condescension,
Mm.
almost a
Yeah.
spiritual condescension, that is just as big a turnoff when it comes from acid heads as when it comes from a sanctimonious, rabbi or minister, and that people recoil about. And there was a lack of respect for the full humanity. Like I remember, my friend Joel, who was the first person I took acid with in high school, said, we just had this idea that there were like two realities. There was our reality, and then there was the reality of all the people who edited the newspapers and ran the government, and that we were in our world. He said, but then I'd be on the subway and I would say, somebody made this. Somehow thousands of people and an enormous amount of effort went to creating the subway. It's like
Mm.
there is something to this civilization thing, even if it was done by people that didn't have love in their hearts all the time, or weren't as sort of cosmic in their perspective, that is worthy of honor, and that's their, like Ramdas would say, dharma. So how to respect someone else's humanity while disagreeing with them? They used to say, the old cliche used to be to disagree without being disagreeable. I mean,
Mm.
that's definitely one of the lessons that we all have to learn now.
Yeah.
And
Yep. Big
Steve
time.
Earle, who you and I are both friends with and who I've worked with for years, is a singer-songwriter who made some very political albums in the Bush era, the W. Bush era. Revolution Starts Now in Jerusalem, and has been very outspoken. He's called himself a socialist, as long as I've known him. But his new record and what he's dealing with now is about songs, as he said, about coal miners in West Virginia, and about the idea that he says, I know that these are people who didn't vote the way I did, but still, they're, to recognize their issues, their humanity, their reasons coming from a different point of view. I mean, that's part of the challenge, is to stay firm in your beliefs and to say no to racism, to say no to cruelty, and at the same time, honor the humanity of people who are seeing things a little differently. And of course, if you're a Democrat and you're trying to figure out, who should run against Trump, we have our own polarization within the Democratic,
Mm-hmm.
universe, between the so-called moderates and the so-called left. And my goodness, if you just go based on Facebook, tremendously bitter feelings from people on both sides towards each other. It's like human beings like to argue. It's like you and I both come from a Jewish background, and we grew up with the joke, you see 5 Jews, there are 6 shuls. You know, is meaning the place where people worship. The desire to argue and to fight each other about things. I think that's a big issue for those people that don't support Trump, is to figure out how to respect and honor the people that worked with Clinton and Obama and did what they felt was the best they could do, and to honor the people like the Bernie Sanders supporters who say, good try, but not good enough in terms of the levels of poverty, suffering, debt, growing disparity of wealth, deterioration of the environment, not enough done about it. Both things are true. It is true that incremental change saves lives. There are people alive today because of the Affordable Care Act and other things that these compromised corporate Democrats got through. And then there are millions of people that were left out of that, and that's part of what created the current crisis. And that how to have harmony even on our own side is the immediate issue as we speak in late February, because my goodness, the tremendous disagreements among our fellow Democrats.
Yeah. Yeah, the polarization is rife throughout. It's pretty amazing now, and I think what you mentioned in terms of back to the '60s, the hipper than thou story, right? That is very existent all the way through now. That let's not forget the kind of polarization that helped correct.
Correct.
It promulgated something really that I think those of us that were in there, and I was way in there, oh my God, kind of forget or don't want to acknowledge that reality of how much we're contributing, have contributed all this time to this kind of polarization. So I think that's an important point when we start looking at the other, us and them, as soon as we get there. And, we could say we're thinking the same things. For instance, if you're a fan of one of the more moderate Democratic candidates and looking at Bernie, and you're thinking, I'm thinking, not you, I am thinking, gee whiz, who? It's no sense. There's no way on earth this guy is electable. The what he, he's espousing certain policies that what percentage is going to support that? So the fact that he's doing this and he's not really addressing electability means that you're all crazy, whoever's supporting that. And that is exactly no different than whatever we think, in general about Trump supporters, that are not realizing that this is not a good man. And I think we want a good man as a president of the United States. But you know what I mean?
Well, I think within the world of Democrats, just to narrow the focus for this part of the conversation for a minute, everybody, as far as I can tell, decides who they want, whether it's for ideological reasons or because of their own feeling of access, and then they construct an electability argument. So, there is an electability argument against all of the candidates. It's not like Bernie is uniquely burdened with some questions about his electability because, first of all the same pundits on television and many of the same politicians who claim that he's so unelectable were all the people that said Obama was unelectable. Yeah. And I had many conversations in 2008 with people who said, look, it'd be so great. He's eloquent, but his middle name is Hussein. He's an African-American. We know there's what was called in California the Tom Bradley effect, of people who said they were going to vote for an African-American but really wouldn't. There was a hidden level of racism. He's too inexperienced. Go down, and then he had all this baggage from his history. If he had been friends with Bill Ayers, who was in the Weather Underground, and he went to Reverend Wright's church, and Reverend Wright made all these sermons that were inflammatory, and that it would be a devastating McGovern-esque defeat. And Obama ended up winning bigger majorities by far than Bill Clinton ever did or Jimmy Carter ever did. And similarly, all of the Republican pundits were claiming that Trump was going to have the worst loss that they ever had since Goldwater. So, they don't really know. the
Mm.
argument about elect, so there's a pro Bernie argument and an anti Bernie argument. I'll just say the pro Bernie argument. Yes, disclosure, I've not been a Bernie supporter in this cycle. I was for him last time. I just decided this time around I was for Elizabeth Warren. I really felt it was time for a woman president. I felt she would do a lot of the same economic changes that he would do, and coming from a similar set of values. And I still feel that, but I think as we speak here now, the odds of her being the nominee are incredibly low, and the odds of Bernie being the nominee are significant. So that's now in the past tense. But the argument for him is, number one, that there were people who voted for Trump who also relate to Bernie because of his, if it's not, if it's just simply anger at the reduced circumstances of so much of the middle class, he has a different prescription for it, but he identifies the same pain and speaks to the same pain. So I'm not so sure that, in all the prime, that he wouldn't peel off some of those people. I am 100% sure that he will definitely get a bigger turnout of young people than anyone else will. He's incredibly popular among younger people of all races, of all backgrounds, in all states. It's these younger people who grew up in the wake of the financial crisis, global warming. They just see a different movie than we see, and they're way 30, 40 points more to the left on, whether it's Democrat versus Republican or within the Democratic Party. And I think if it was a fair universe, which we know it's not, we don't even have a real democracy in America. We have this complicated 18th century system. But I think younger people should get 2 votes instead of me getting 1 vote. I think my son should be able to get 2 votes because he's 26. And the consequences of the election mean a heck of a lot more to him than they do to me. He's going to have far more decades of life to have to deal with. I think that the turnout of younger people is a big deal. That's their argument. The counter argument is that there are these suburban women who helped make Nancy Pelosi speaker by electing more Democrats in the midterms, and that they are going to be scared off by some of Bernie's so-called radical ideas. Now, let's really look at what the ideas are, because if you poll a wealth tax, should everybody pay 2% over $50 million, 70% support that. I mean, a lot of Republicans support it also. If you poll, Medicare for all is popular. It's not popular among the people that you see on cable news because it destabilizes a whole structure that some people benefit from, A. And B, a lot of Democrats remember how difficult it was even to deal with the transition to Obamacare, and they don't want to risk transitions having to do with health care can be very politically destabilizing. Today, Obamacare is very popular, and anyone who threatens to get in the way of people with pre-existing conditions being able to get insurance is going to lose an election. But right after it became implemented, it was unpopular. And it hurt because people were so freaked out by the new thing. You got to go on a new website and deal with uncertainty. So, it's a legitimate debate, but I don't see the other candidates as being more electable. I worry about Joe Biden's ability to function in an election. I think 10 years ago it was a different Joe Biden. And the idea of him debating Trump really scares me. I worry about Bloomberg, the idea that you tell this young generation, we're going to ignore what you want and put in someone that was a Republican and a billionaire because he has more money and spent more money, and that's why we should support him. I'll vote for any of them if they get the nomination, and I'll enthusiastically. But I don't think that millions of younger people who didn't vote last time and who voted third party are going to be motivated just because of things we say. And then, the others haven't demonstrated any, I think Buttigieg is a compelling figure. He's come from relative obscurity to becoming a national figure very quickly. He's obviously got tremendous raw political talent and could be a significant leader in the future, but there's no evidence that he can attract people of color or younger people, even though he's younger. A lot of the people who support him are older. and again, I'll still vote for Elizabeth Warren if she's still on the ballot by the time New York comes around. But to me, as we sit here, the choices look like Bloomberg, Biden, or Bernie. Or if it's a deadlock convention, maybe they would turn to someone else. Three guys in their 70s, only one of whom can talk to younger people, and only one of whom can talk to some of the disenfranchised, Trump voters. At the same time, Bernie will turn off some people who are just freaked out by the fact that he uses the word socialist, or that they think he's some kind of a radical that scares them. But I'm not sure that you don't win more people than you lose with him. I'm not sure one way or the other. No one knows. As I say, I think they construct these arguments in service of who they want anyway.
Mm.
And I do the same thing. I
Yeah.
do the same exact thing.
Yeah. I like the idea of next gen getting 2 votes and then old people getting only 1. That's a good idea.
I wish I had an outlet. Again, The Nation gives me this column, where I can write about things connected to artists and entertainment. I'm very grateful for it. It's a subject dear to my heart. But if I just had a general column somewhere, I would definitely do that. I would put that out there as a proposal. It would never happen, but I think it would change. Hopefully people just morally think about, we just really should pay more attention to younger people's feelings about these things. I mean, they've got more at stake. That's just a fact.
Yeah. Yeah. And
boy, you talk to people in their 20s, it's a very different conversation for the most part than what you see on the TV news. It's a very different conversation.
Yeah, and we meet a lot of people. Obviously the ones that are interested in consciousness are more of the ones we meet. But still, I'll tell you truthfully, their want to do stuff within the social structures to help, be it just around food, around hunger, is pretty awesome. And the environment, probably number one. But how many young people are working towards doing something about that? So
that's a visceral issue with younger people. It's not an abstract thing to them.
Right.
It's an existential issue. So look, I don't know. I mean, the most important thing is to try to remember who we are as souls, to try to tune in with our highest self. For me, prayer and meditation has become the best way, but everybody has their own way of doing that, and then trying to take your cues from that. I mean, as that all filters through my mind, it feels to me as we sit here, there's a good chance that Bernie Sanders is going to get the nomination. And I just pray that if he does, that he runs a campaign and picks a running mate that can be inclusive while sticking to his principles, and create the frame for a broader campaign and a broader sense of community. If it's not him, I hope whoever it is honors the emotions and ethics of the younger people who so fervently believe in him, and don't just ignore them. I thought Hillary Clinton, I think, would have been a good president. I think she might have been better than her husband was, and I voted for her. But, when she picked that guy, Tim Kaine, as a running mate, whatever his virtues might have been, it sent a message to all the Bernie voters of screw you, take it or leave it. Instead of trying to unite the party and get, it was about like, we won, you lost, and I think that pushed a couple of million people away unnecessarily. I mean, she still could have controlled everything and had a different kind of messenger. Obviously, she thought she was going to win and didn't have to worry about that, and was picking someone she was comfortable with as a possible successor. But it was definitely a mistake politically. I hope that whoever gets the nomination doesn't make that kind of a mistake. I hope they use that slot as a way of broadening their, the sense of who they care about, because these things, people just want to be respected. Very few of us understand policy. I don't actually understand, the federal government. It's this incredibly vast, complicated bureaucracy that, I've never worked in or studied. I just have basic values I like the idea of Medicare for all if they can do it in a way that doesn't screw things up. I like the idea of, free college. People act like that's a radical idea. That's not radical. I mean, when I was growing up, there was free community college, and University was free.
Mm.
University of California was basically free. It's only in the last 30 or 40 years that there's all this college debt. So when that proposal is not only is it not radical, not only does every other civilized country figure out a way to get kids college degrees without them incurring hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. This country used to do it. That's a new phenomenon of
Yeah.
bankers and others figuring out a way to suck more money out of the system, and the interest rates that these kids pay is just unconscionable. So that's not a radical position he's taking. That's just a restoration of the balance that we had in the when you and I were growing up, and I don't understand people who say that's radical. It's just what's radical is people coming out of college and having $250,000 of debt and having to spend the next 20 years of their life limiting every single decision they make because of that.
Yeah. Of course, what we're talking about is a topsy-turvy policy change to, what did you say at the beginning? Like if 3% of the defense budget was spent, people would
it would feed everybody. I think, it would feed. It would eliminate starvation in the world.
Yeah, and probably
look,
another.
that's been our whole life. And easy to say, hard to implement because well, who's going to give up which weapon? I don't envy the people who have to have those conversations, but it's the right conversation to try to reverse it.
The things that I'm getting from, because we're talking a lot about next generation and how they support Bernie and what he represents in such a big way. And I just have to, again, I was talking about the people that are coming through the foundation and working or consulting or just coming and being a part of retreats or whatever. And, we're bumping into a lot of next gen people. And of course, yes, they are, as I said, they're all into consciousness and developing some internal self-inquiry to get real with themselves and have a more of a balanced life. And I said all of them, they're all about what's going on in the environment and also the discrepancy in terms of financial means in this country, in the world.
Yeah, yeah.
So here's what they're always talking about as well, and it's community is a huge thing. I did a thing the other night. We have a fellowship program at Love Serve Remember, Ram Dass Fellowship, and people around the country get together in community, feed each other, and do a little chanting or meditation, whatever. And we're encouraging these. And so I went up and I just did a little, since Ram Dass left so recently, just talked about that and what he meant as far as community. What he meant as far as community, sangha, satsang, community, family of one-pointed and like-minded interest. And what he did for that was enormous. And I started talking about
incredible for so many legacies he has, but that's definitely one of them.
Yep.
It's for the rest of our lives. There's thousands of people who, you like be here now? It's like an immediate sense of, okay, we have something in common. We have some shared value system. I think that's true, I think some people feel that way about Christianity and other things, but for millions of people, he created a set of an attitude about life and a sense of community that outlives him.
And non-judgment. Non-judgment. That has been not just about others, but about yourself. It's okay to be human. That added feature makes a quite a big difference. So these people wanted that. There was a few hundred, 250 people just wanting, just saying, we want that. So community, definitely. Acceptance, inclusion, those are other big things that we get fed back. And honestly, and you know, these people that are in the case that we're talking about, Bernie, you know far better than I, that seems to be the case of what he's representing. They really want that, and he does represent some of those ideas for sure. So
Well, yeah. Look, again,
this isn't a pro Bernie thing. I didn't, because
yeah, no, you know, still an Elizabeth Warren supporter, voter, and donor. My son, both of my kids are for Bernie, and I think that's just what's going on in a lot of families. Is where kids are for Bernie and the parents aren't. You just look at the voting patterns; it's obviously different
yeah,
pattern. But
yeah,
I think that the two things I think firstly, because he's been so consistent for his entire public career, there's a personal trust that even if he makes mistakes, which they all do, that he's coming from a pure place of his beliefs,
yeah, right,
and
exactly.
that I think there's a trust in his that overused word authenticity that he's earned. Secondly, I think there's a feeling that a lot of us have, of all generations, but particularly young people, of whatever the virtues were of Barack Obama, and I think he's probably the best president of my lifetime, certainly. I mean, I have quite a fondness for the 3 years of John Kennedy's presidency, and LBJ obviously did certain things that were incredibly helpful during the first part of his presidency. But you know, I'm an Obama admirer. I'm glad my kids grew up with him as president. I think he did, you know, the Affordable Care Act alone and many other things he did were great. But he basically had a similar point of view that Bill Clinton did about about deference to Wall Street and the banks,
Mm-hmm.
and allowed them to continue to take bigger and bigger and bigger pieces of the resources of the nation, and control more and more, whether including academia and the media and politicians, in a way that created this tremendous burden on tens and tens of millions of people, whose counterparts a generation earlier were living decent middle class lives. Again, there was no college debt when we were
Yeah,
growing up;
right,
it did
right.
not exist.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah.
You know, and the wealth disparity. There were, of course, very wealthy people and there were poor people, but the disparity, you know, all the statistics tell us this is the worst it's ever been, and
Mm.
you know, similar, but even a little more extreme than the early 1920s, and you know, so-called Gilded Age. So I think that there's a lack of confidence that, hey, we're the grown-ups, we know how to do this.
Yeah.
You know, just
Yeah.
all the Bill Clinton and Obama people just do what they say. It's as good as it's going to get. It'll only get worse if you don't have us in there. That there was a cohort of people who said, "I'm sorry, it's just not good enough. We
Yeah.
respect what you've done." Some of them say it. I say it. I have friends who worked in both those administrations who were totally idealistic, beautiful people who did the best they could do. But the basic mindset gave way too much deference
Yeah.
to a system that you know, that thing of the 1% or the 1/10 of 1% or the 1/100th of 1%, and the vast increase in economic insecurity in the middle is not okay,
Yeah.
and that they see everybody else. Some of us feel Warren also would be an alternative. That there needs to be, like what Sheik talks about, structural change. Now, when they say structural change, to me that doesn't mean burning down the house. I think just to start with, to go back to some of the policies and tax rates that there were pre-Reagan would be a good start in terms of,
Mm.
you know, in terms of the relative wages of people, the difference between what an average worker has and a CEO. You know, used to be 80 or 100 times as much. Now it's 500 or 600 times as much. I'm sorry. I think CEOs deserve a lot of money. I was a CEO of companies. I felt I earned my money, but I wouldn't have minded paying 10% more taxes if everybody else could have a more stable life. It's just a better world that way.
Mm.
So I think
Well,
a lot of
talk.
young people have just had it with what they
Yeah.
call neoliberalism or corporate Democrats. I don't like it when they're disrespectful or rude to those people, because a lot of them, to me, really fought heroically. But at the same time, you can't just tell people that all the ideas that the Clintons had in the 90s, that's it. That's the end of human creativity, and that's the
Yeah.
end of political progression, and just we just have replicas of them, because that's not working.
Yeah. I want to just close, Danny, with this, which is also comes from that Ram Dass talk we were referencing from '93, around stories and myths that we're in between and what we've lived with in order to be effective players, which is what really we've been talking about here, somewhat. But so, just thinking about the work this is what represents what we are doing here at the foundation, the work on ourselves. So inner social work, you might say, inner social action, rather. And
Yes.
so as we do that work should inform to allow for social structures that are compassionate and just. It should allow us to hear each other and celebrate ethnic diversity instead of being threatened by it. And it should allow for us to walk way more lightly on this earth. And it should allow that we can just hear each other, right? This is the aspirations that I think um, hopefully we can really offer that and share that, and next generation can make it, execute it, and make it effective. That's my hope and
Well,
wish for the day.
well, I think that's a good hope, and just I'm a big believer, as you know, my teacher that we both knew, Hilda Charlton, used to say, if you can't think of anything else to do, just say, I breathe in the love of God, I breathe out love to all humanity. I breathe in the love of God, I breathe out love.
Mm.
That if you're not coming from a place of love, it's hard to get things done. Now, if I could just go off into a weird tangent, because you were kind enough to share that Ram Dass thing with me, to just give the listeners a sense of what his frame of mind was. He's talking about Bill Clinton, and he was optimistic about Clinton and Gore. He was thinking they're young and they seem to have a lot of good values, and he liked that George Stephanopoulos' family came from a Greek, a religious family. He says, but I'm just not sure how awake Clinton is. I mean, he thinks he likes Paul McCartney songs better than John Lennon's songs. So how awake could he be? So,
That's
when you
perfect.
talk about Ram Dass's multitudes, he could be so cosmic and be such a role model for tuning into the purest element of God, and at the same time, had many opinions that I agree with on a human level, and was able to shuttle between his humanity and his cosmic definition of his soul in a way that showed us a lot of the way that you can be kind of a jerk some of the time and still aspire to
Yes, we are.
holiness, and
We can live on more than
that's
one
the
plane, right?
yeah
We
yeah
can, we
we have
can.
no choice.
Well, no, sometimes we have a choice and we get stuck in that lower plane, thinking we're, not
Yeah yeah
able
yeah
to operate.
yeah 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 exactly
So
right,
yeah.
yeah.
So thanks, Danny. Thank you very, very, very much. And by the way, everybody, when you go to BeHereNowNetwork.com/mindrolling, you'll see the show notes, and we'll have some of Danny's books that you can connect with. By the way, my favorite is Bumping into Geniuses. Okay, so
Thank you.
I love that book. I mean, they're all great, and they all have something to say. And we shall see you next time on
Groovy.
Mind Rolling. Thanks again, Dave.